Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Metzia Daf Kuf Yotes Bava Metzia 119. The Daf Yomi is dedicated for Shemira for Am Yisrael, Hatzalah for the Shvuyim, Yeshua for the Chayalim. And during this Eis Tzara for Am Yisrael, we're grateful to being able to come to the last page of Bava Metzia. In the same way we've been able to study every page together, may we have the merit to study many more Masechtos together and all of Shas many, many times together. So we're going to start with the Mishnah on Kuf Ches on the base 118b. It says the Mishnah, Hamotzi Zevor Shasarabim, one who takes out his manure into the public domain, is to take out the manure in order to finish it off so that it would be, they would take out the dung and it would be turned into a proper product. Motzi, the one who takes it out, mezabel. And then right away, the person who's wants to use the manure has to take it. Ein shorim betit pershus haram. You're not allowed to leave the clay in the public for a long time. Vein lovnim uveinim. You're not allowed to make the bricks, which is also something that you would leave them there in order to dry. Aval govlin tit pershus harabim. You're allowed to mix the clay in the public domain because you mixed it and then right away you used it. And also vololavanim, but not the bricks, because that would be too long of a process. She says, when the bricks, you have to leave it there a long time to dry. Habona versus Arabim, somebody who builds in public, or maybe let's say you have a job to build in public. Maybe Avonim, maybe Babona Bona, the one who brings the stones brings them, and right away the builder has to build. Vim Hizik, Mishan Masha Hizik, but he's allowed to do it. But if he causes damage, he has to pay for it. He's responsible. Shmuel Gamliel says, Af Metakin who has Malachto Afnei Shloshim Yom. Not only does he have to do it right away, but he also has 30 days to leave the stuff there. So Shimon Gamliel is saying not only does he not have to pay, but he's allowed to bring it there earlier, 30 days in advance. And also, as the Gemara is going to clarify, if he causes damage as a result of this, he's not going to be responsible to pay. So Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is disputing the Tanakama. So first of all, the Gemara says, Lema Masnisin, Rabbi Yehuda, our Mishnah must not be like Rabbi Yehuda, because the Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer B'Shas Tzavalim. Rabbi Yehuda says when you bring the manure out, Adam Motzi Zevala Rishus Harabim, V'Tzobro Kol Shloshim Yom K'dei Sheyeh Nishuf B'Ragli Adam B'Ragli Behema. Shamanaskein Hinchil Yoshua Yisrael Sa'aretz. Rabbi Yehuda's other position that when you take out the manure, a person is allowed to take it out and pile it up for 30 days so that when the people step on it, they purify it. And because it's on this condition, that this was one of the 10 conditions that Joshua said the Jewish people could enter into the land, that you're allowed to bring your manure out. And so we see from here, Rabbi Yehuda allows you to leave it there for 30 days and not just remove it right away. It must be that Rabbi Yehuda is inconsistent with our Mishnah. The Gemara says, no, afilu teima Rabbi Yehuda. You could even say our Mishnah is consistent with Rabbi Yehuda. Moda Rabbi Yehuda Shem Hizik Chayav Hashem. Rabbi Yehuda would say you're allowed to do it, but if you did it, you have to pay for it. So our Mishnah doesn't say, basically, Rabbi Yehuda's agree with our Mishnah that you're responsible to pay. He's just saying you're allowed to do it for 30 days, but he would still agree that you'd have to pay. The Gemara says, is this really the case? That Rabbi Yehuda says if you do something with permission, you have to pay. But Tanan, Moda Rabbi Yehuda b'ner Chanukah shulpatrim nesha usebershus. But doesn't Rabbi Yehuda say about the Mishnah that we learned in Baba Kama, or maybe it's it's a dispute amongst the Rishonim, that if you left your candles in public, you're exempt because you had permission to do that. My love, aren't we talking about that case? They were talking about rishus debate, and that you have the permission of the court, and yet therefore you're going to say you're exempt. So by the Ner Chanukah, by the candles of Chanukah, and we said no, we're talking about a case of rishus the mitzvah. No, the case of candles is different because not that you have permission to do that. It's a higher threshold of allowance because it's the allowance to do a mitzvah of lighting the Hanukkah candles, and therefore you're exempt from having to pay. Gemara says, but is that really the case? Vatanya call all elush amram mutarin lekalkal b'rashus harabim. He's a chayav l'shalem. Rabbi Yehuda Potter. But don't we say in all of these cases where they said that you're allowed to do damage in public, if you did the damage, you Vatanya, then we say kol elush amram mutarin lekalkal b'rashus harabim. Im hizik chayav l'shalem. Rabbi Yehuda Potter. Then we say in all these cases where you're allowed to do damage and destruction in the public domain, if you did the damage, you have to pay, whereas Rabbi Yehuda says you're exempt. So we see from here, Rabbi Yehuda says explicitly, if the court allows you to do it, then you're going to be exempt. So this is all those damages that the sages say that you have permission to mess up the public, like taking out the menorah. Here's the explicit price, so the Rabbi Yehuda says you're exempt. So the Gemara says, okay, it's very clear that our Mishnah is not going to be like Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda says if you do something with the court's permission, then in fact you're going to be considered to be exempt. So the Gemara now says, Amar Abaye, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon, Kusviru, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, and Rabbi Shimon. Good morning, Harold. We're on 118b. 3/4 of the way down from the page that we just said that Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel all say the same thing. And what do they say? That any circumstance where the rabbis gave you permission and you still did the damage, you're going to be exempt. Rabbi Yehuda Amram, Rabbi Yehuda, because like we said in our case, that if you brought out the manure and you did the damage with it, you're exempt if your manure damaged somebody. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, "Af mitakin hu es malachto afnei shloshim yom." This is Rabbi Shimon Gamliel from our Mishnah. Rashi says it means Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says not only are you allowed to put your building materials in public for 30 days before you start the actual construction, but since you had the permission of the court, you had a permit from the city, basically. Therefore, if it damaged somebody, you're exempt from having to pay. And Rabbi Shimon, what's the case of Rabbi Shimon? Let's say you have somebody in the upper story of your apartment. But basically what happens is the guy on top wants to put in an oven. So you need to put in a plaster, you have to put in a floor of 3 tefachim. But if it'll be a stove, which is less intense, tefach. But the Tanakama here says in this Mishnah in Bava, we're going to see this in Bava Basra soon, and we said in Bava Kama, that Tanakama says if you do the damage, you're allowed to put the stove or the oven, but if your stove or oven damages the guy below, you're responsible. Whereas Rabbi Shimon said, says, no, the reason why we have a code, the reason why the city tells us exactly how much space you have to put in the floor in order to allow you to put in your chimney, that's because to tell us that if you follow the code and it caused damage, you're exempt from having to pay. The next case is Tan Rabbanan Achatzav Shemasar Wasate. So we're talking about basically the different levels. The context here is we're talking about a building project, and there's different workers who are involved in the construction. And at one point, the brick goes bad and it drops, it breaks. So let's say there's the guy who's cutting it out from the mountain, and he gave it to the guy who's basically has to cut the stone, hasatat chayv, and then once the satat gets it and he drops it, he's responsible. Hasatat shemasar chamar. Let's say the stone cutter gave it to the donkey driver. Chamar chayv, the donkey driver is responsible. Chamar shemasar lekatef. Then there's the porter. The katef is chayv. He's the one who's responsible. Katef shemasar lebanai. Then there's the builder. Abanai chayv. The builder gave it to the adrichal is responsible. Who's the adrichal? Rashi says the adrichal is the Ava Umnim. He's the master engineer on the project. He's the guy who's going to tell you exactly where to place the brick. If he drops it, he's responsible. Let's say you put the stone on top and then it falls off and it's damaged. All the workers have to chip in to pay the price of the brick. Gemara says Vatayim, but then we have a different price, and it says Achron Chayiv, that the last one who put it there is responsible. The Kulam Paturim and everybody else is exempt. So the Gemara says Lokasha Kambasiris Kamakablanas. No, the distinction is each person hired specifically, or is it a general project, a general contract for the job? If it's a general contract, they have to share. But if it's each one is hired specifically, then we're going to say, if they're specifically hired for a job and they're all together, then we're going to say that they all have to chip in to pay. So that's the distinction. That's the distinction. So basically, the difference is clearest is each person, once they finish their job, they're allowed to go. Kabbanos, they basically get paid at the end of the job, at the end of the whole job. So therefore, they're all responsible. Now we're up to the last Mishnah of the Masechta. Shtei ganos zu al gabe zu. Let's say you have two gardens, one on top of the other. Vayerak bein tayim. So basically, the way we have here, the way we can imagine is we have, let's say, an upper level where there's a garden, and a bottom level there's a garden, and then there's a slope in between the two, a small slope which has a garden in between. We know who owns the one on top. We know who owns the one on bottom, and now there's some vegetables on the vertical space in between the two gardens. Our mayor says that the vegetables belong to Shel Elyon. It goes to the top guy, because, and you'll see in a moment. But if you just think about it, the top person. Okay, but don't take that Gemara, Jeff. That's the Bava Metzia. I brought that out because when we started, Mayor was here, and I said we're going to maybe switch to Bava Metzia at the beginning. So I brought it out for him, but we'll get it for everybody. So basically, we have two gardens, one on top, one below, and then there's a vertical patch in between which has some vegetables. Now you can imagine that the guy on top, his earth from his garden goes down, and it fills the space where the vertical garden is currently standing. So Meir says it belongs to the vertical garden, belongs to the upper guy. Rabbi Yehuda says it belongs to the top garden, belongs to the lower farmer. I'm a Rabbi Meir. Meir says in Mirta only kachas efro in kanyarik. He says if the top guy wants to take his earth, then there's no vegetables. He could just take his earth, and then there's nothing to sustain the vegetable. Rabbi Yehuda, Mirta Tachto, Ginaso in Kanyarik. Well, then the guy in the bottom theoretically has the right to fill up his whole garden with stones or whatever he wants, and then there's no vegetables. So I'm a Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir says, yeah, I'll agree with you that both of them could prevent the other person. So therefore, let's look where this vegetable is nourished from. It's nourished from the soil of the top guy. So therefore, he gets it. I'm Rabbi Shimon. No, Rabbi Shimon says anything where the top person is able to stick out his hand. So Rabbi Shimon comes up with the third position. He says basically it's kind of splitting it. Any situation where the top one can stick out his hand and take it, that belongs to him. V'ashar, and the other stuff that he can't stick out his hand, harei shall tachton. And the other part belongs to the bottom person, whatever he can't reach. Some of the commenters have pointed out that the last Mishnah of our tractate is really like the first Mishnah of the tractate, where it says you split it. So here it's a form of splitting it. I'm a Rava, so now Rava says, if it's the roots of the vegetable, everybody agrees that belongs to the top person. We're only arguing about the branches. The branches follow the roots. We don't say that the branches follow the roots, according to Rabbi Yehuda. And we have a similar circumstance about, well, it's actually going to be like, another case about business. So basically, the general rule is that if you purchase a tree, you purchase just the tree, but you don't get all the land around it. You just get that tree. So let's say you purchased the tree, and now there's a shoot or like a baby tree coming out from the trunk or the roots. So Rabbi Meir is going to say that's basically being nourished by the ground, so that's going to belong to the owner of the land around it. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, it's coming from the trunk, it belongs to the owner of the tree, but from the root, Shabbat Karka. That's going to come to the ground. And that's like the same idea here. And we have a similar case right in the Testament Aleph, where we say, we have a similar circumstance about Orla in this similar manner. What's the case of Orla? Orla is the tree. The first 3 years that the tree's planted, you're not allowed to eat from it. So let's say we have a tree that's coming out from the trunk. Do we view that as a new tree? Rameir says we view it as being nourished from the ground, and so therefore it's going to be responsible for Orla. You can't touch it the first 3 years. Rabbi Yehuda says, says, no, there's a distinction where it's coming out from. If it's coming out from the trunk, then we're going to view it as not responsible for Orla, but from the ground, we view it as Orla. We really have to know what exactly what we say, the Metzios of what's the difference between a shoot that's coming out from a tree and a branch, which is obviously not Orla. So that's something we need to go out, really, to do this properly. We need to go out and look at the different possible ways for a tree to grow. We need this to be taught about by a purchase of a tree and also by a Orla. If we just learned this halacha by a tree, we would say Rabbi Yehuda. In that case, we'll say that Rabbi Yehuda teaches this law. Mishum de Mamona. Why? Because it's a monetary law, and so therefore Rabbi Yehuda would say we'll split it. The guy doesn't get just because there's a shoot coming out from the tree doesn't mean he gets that the person who owns the land gets to keep it. But by Orla, which is case of a prohibition, even Rabbi Meir, so maybe it'll be strict and follow Rabbi Meir that you have to do Orla again there. And if we only in the case of Orla, he would say that's where Rabbi Meir is strict. Maybe he'll agree to Rabbi Yehuda in this case. So therefore, we need it in all three cases. But the interesting thing is, usually when there's a tzricha, it goes through all the possibilities. But here there's a third case. So why do we need the third case? The third case is the case of our Mishnah. So they didn't address that. Maybe they talk about that in the footnote, but they didn't directly address that. So now we're up to the next piece. Rabbi Shimon, Kol Shah, Elyon Yaakov Shah. Rabbi Shimon says any situation where the top person can reach out his hand and take the branches that belongs to him, take the foliage that belongs to him. Amri debei Rabbi Yanai, Bavad Shel Yanos. Rabbi Shimon said this as long as the top person it doesn't put himself in danger of actually falling. Meaning to say, as long as he can reach it without the danger of hurting himself. And why is then the other person get it? So technically speaking, the commentaries say everything belongs to the top guy, but he's abandoning the stuff on the vegetables because he doesn't want to have to ask permission for this small amount to have to go into the guy's yard to get it, so he's abandoning it. By Ravanavi Rabbi Yirmiyah, Magil and Nofo, Magil Karl. So now Ravanan and some say Rabbi Yirmiyah. Well, it's interesting, Rabbi Yirmiyah, he's always the one who asks what we might say the nudnik questions. He can never let it go. We'll see more about this for Rabbi Yirmiyah in the next track. He never lets it go. So Rabbi Yirmiyah, some say Ravanan and some say Rabbi Yirmiyah, they ask the following question. Basically, let's say there's a vegetable that the guy at the top can reach the branches. The Amagili Karl, but somehow he can't reach the roots. Somehow the roots are lower. So that's a different question. Or Magili Karo, or let's say he can reach the roots, the Imagil and Nofo, but he can't reach the branches. So what will be the answer in this case? So the Gemara says, we leave this question unresolved. So now we come to the last sentence of the last case of the Masechta. Ephraim Safra Talmido Rish Lakish. So Ephraim, the scribe, who was a student of Rish Lakish. I don't remember this ever hearing about a student of Rish Lakish in the rest of the Shas. I'm not saying I haven't gone through it, but this seems to me like a one-off. Ephraim Safra. I also don't remember him appearing elsewhere. And he says in the name of Rish Lakish, the law is like Halach with Rabbi Shimon, that you split it. Whatever the guy can reach on top is his, and whatever the other guy and whatever else he can't reach, it belongs to the person below. So Amrua Kamei de Shabar Malka. They said it's in front of Shabar Malka. Rashi has two explanations. One of the explanations is that Shabar Malka is a reference to Shmuel, because Shmuel is an expert in civil law. Rashi prefers actually the first explanation he offers, which says this was the king of Persia. So this explanation of Rabbi Shimon about what do you do about this vertical garden was said in front of Shabar Malka, that you split it. And he said, Apirion Nimtayo Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon should receive from us a favor or blessing or grace because he followed this position. So the idea to me is so powerful that here we come to the last line of the tractate. It's all about civil law, a lot about civics and communal responsibility. And the Gemara ends by saying that the king of the Persians was recognizing that these laws are not only relevant for the Jewish people, but for all of society, that we have a basis here of making an equitable society that everyone will benefit from. I want to say a couple of things now. We're going to, God willing, do a siyum on Shabbos morning after we make Kiddush, and then hopefully everybody who's been studying can come with a Dvar Torah about it, and we'll make a siyum about this, and we will thank Hashem for this opportunity. But now it's always the practice that whenever you finish one Masechta, you don't stop. You start immediately the next one. So we'll turn and immediately begin Bava Basra. Let me just bring some Gemaras here.